the garden clock really has something to tell us, and that something is that we have to allow ourselves to move through these cycles of rot and decay and almost nothingness before coming out the other side.
Hey everyone, on this week's episode, the British writer and cultural critic Olivia Laing meets me for a conversation inside their apartment at the Barbican in London. For those of you listening who are unfamiliar with it, although I'm sure most of you know it or have been to an exhibition or concert there, the Barbican is a brutalist concrete complex that was built as a sort of utopian social, cultural, and architectural exercise in a blitz-damaged area of the city. It combines residential apartment towers and an arts center that hosts theater, music, and exhibitions, all of it above street level on elevated walkways. I should add here that at some point in the interview, you may hear the faint sound of kids playing in a schoolyard just outside Olivia's window. Fittingly, Olivia and I talk about notions of utopia quite a bit on the episode, as it's a subject that fascinates both of us, and in these times feels particularly urgent. I especially appreciate their emphasis on spending less time imagining dystopias and instead putting our energy toward imagining the kind of world we want to and potentially could live in. Olivia is the author of several books, most recently The Garden Against Time, with their next title, the novel The Silver Book, coming out in the U.S. this fall. Other books of theirs include 2020's Funny Weather, Art in an Emergency, and their critically acclaimed breakout, 2016's The Lonely City, Adventures in the Art of Being Alone. Among other things, we talk about Olivia's deep, lifelong relationship to gardens and plants, and their recent first-hand experience of restoring a garden at their house in Suffolk, England. The concept of garden time, the central role that looking with intention, or what could be called slow looking, plays in their writing as well as in their creative life at large, and in our increasingly sped-up, hyper-online lives, networked thinking and in-person gatherings as vital pathways toward reestablishing a shared sense of humanity. Before we get into the episode, I'd first like to thank our Season 12 presenting sponsor, the high jewelry maison Van Cleef & Arpels, which this year is collaborating with the American Museum of Natural History in New York to present the exhibition Cosmic Splendor, jewelry from the collections of Van Cleef & Arpels. An awe-inspiring assemblage of jewelry creations, timepieces, and precious objects with astronomical references from the Maison's patrimonial collection, as well as from private loans. From dramatic necklaces depicting rockets in flight, to gem-encrusted pendants inspired by distant nebulae, to watches with intricate mechanisms that trace the transit of planetary bodies. Cosmic Splendor features nearly 70 astrological, celestial, and mythological creations that celebrate the wonders and mysteries of the cosmos. Among the enchanting universe of pieces on display are a yellow, gold, and ruby moon pendant from 1969 that's a celebration of the Apollo 11 moon landing, a yellow gold zodiac bracelet from 1973, and 2021 double galaxies clips, characterized by their evocative swirling designs. These works trace the stylistic evolution and the level of expertise that the high jewelry maison, founded in Paris's Place Vendôme in 1906, has developed throughout its history. You can purchase admission tickets or learn more about Cosmic Splendor at amnh.org/exhibitions. That's amnh.org/exhibitions. And now, here's my conversation with Olivia. Hi, Olivia. Welcome to Time Sensitive.
Hi.
First off, I should say how lucky I feel to be sitting here in your apartment at the Barbican in London, this magical place. I've always wanted to visit one of these apartments, so this is particularly special to be sitting here.
The nicest thing about this apartment is it has huge glass windows, but we've actually drawn the curtains, so we're sitting in a sort of darkened chamber. You're not really getting the full vibes.
Well, let's talk quickly then about the Barbican. How do you think about this home in the trajectory of your life and your homes? Like, what is residing in the Barbican, which you've put it is a utopian burst of a building or burst of building? What does this mean to you?
Oh, it's a really magic place. This building, it's Europe's biggest arts centre, but it was built out of the wreckage of the Blitz. You know, there was this period of mass bombing of London. This area, we're in the City of London, was the most affected. So the old city, the medieval city, was completely annihilated. And you have this post-war moment where people looked at that space and they didn't think, how much profit can we wring for this? They thought, let's make an arts centre, let's make a library, let's make a huge housing estate that is very beautiful and utilitarian and generous. It has all kinds of gardens around it. So it feels to me like it's a physical, concrete embodiment of these kind of dreams of communal possession of public wealth that I, as a socialist, am deeply invested in. It's a magic place to work. And this is really, it's a one-room studio, and this is my office. It's where I do my thinking. It's kind of my retreat spot. So yeah, it's a very special place. I'm happy to have you here, Spencer.
Thank you. Well, I was just thinking too how almost like your writing and your life, I guess, your extended life, this structure, this compound that is the Barbican is a radical act.
It's a radical act. It really is. Yeah. And people still hate it. Right up to the present day, there's a restoration project happening at the moment, and the Times newspaper said that building should be knocked down. It's so ugly. Like, it infuriates people because it really embodies that kind of modernist dream. It's brutalist, it's confrontational, but it's about generosity. So yeah, I'm on the side of the Barbican.
And even though it's brutalist, it's also a garden.
It's full of gardens, yeah. It's actually quite grey and almost rainy today, but otherwise I'd be suggesting that we were recording in one of the gardens because they're very special. There's a great big lake, which is actually it's the bomb site that was turned into a lake. And there are these beautiful gardens with really exciting plantings. It's not the kind of ethos that you see in parks today. It's really about making it as good as possible for as many people as possible. I like that.
Well, this is a smooth, easy transition because I wanted to turn to your latest book, The Garden Against Time, which as soon as I saw it on bookstore shelves, I was like, I have to get Olivia on the podcast. Since we've spoken a little bit about this Barbican home here, I was wondering if you could just speak also to your house in Suffolk, which had been owned by the distinguished gardener Mark Roomery.
I'd lived in New York, then I was living in Cambridge. I got married to a Cambridge don, an academic, who was coming up for retirement, and we decided that we wanted to live somewhere with a garden. You know, I've spent my whole life in rented accommodation and really moved an awful lot. I had a very kind of turbulent relationship with housing over the years.
It was like 16 times in 30 years, I read, something like that.
Well, I think it was 16 times just before I was 18. Yeah, We moved and moved and moved. I mean, for lots of alcoholism, traumatic reasons, and then just economic insecurity in like capitalism, everybody's reason. Anyway, we ended up deciding that we would move to Suffolk and looking for somewhere with a garden. And that process of looking went on for a few years. And then I saw online this description of a house, but particularly description of a garden. And it was like, it's divided up into rooms. It's got a quatrefoil pond, you know, just very romantic descriptions. And I was like, oh, well, I need to see this place. It's probably not a possibility at all, but let's go. And it said that it had been designed by Mark Roomery, and that was interesting. I didn't know him then, but I knew the Suffolk nursery, Not Cuts, that he worked for because it's one of the most famous nurseries in the country. And we went to see it on a winter's day, traditionally not a great time for gardens, but he'd planted it both for structure and for scent. So you come out the back door of the house and it's almost like these enclosed chambers. They're very beautiful. They're divided by hedges. They're divided by walls. And there are plants like daphnes and like witch hazel that just sent these kind of currents of perfume out into kind of cold air. And it was absolutely bewitching, but also it was very neglected. It was very wild. And it was clearly a restoration project. And actually, when I look back at photos from that period, I think I completely underestimated the level of restoration because I was so excited. But it was a big job to kind of draw it back, but instantly enchanting.
So he had passed away in, 2010?
He died in 2010. The last maybe 5 years, I think, of him being there, he couldn't really cope with it anymore. So I think that putting it together from photos later, I think that it was already kind of getting a bit wild. But then very luckily for me, the people who took it on weren't gardeners. They treated it like it was sort of antique furniture. So they were like, don't take anything out, don't touch anything, just leave it. So I came back and nothing had been lost, but it was all like hidden under ivy. It was a real secret garden, Sleeping Beauty kind of situation. You know, the dream situation, as long as you're willing to carry ton after ton bag of ivy out, which I was.
There's definitely a metaphor there somewhere, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
In your book, you write about the garden as a mysterious timepiece. I'm going to quote here from perhaps my favorite passage in the book. You write, "The garden is a clock. What a beautiful image. Garden time is not like the ordinary time in which we live. It's different to a watch or the glowing numbers on an iPhone lock screen. It moves in unpredictable ways, sometimes stopping altogether and proceeding always cyclically, in a long, winding spiral of rot and fertility. To pay attention to the garden as a clock means entering a different relationship with time, as circular, not linear, as well as the acknowledgement that one of its recurring stations is death."
That's my favorite paragraph too, actually. I love that.
I mean, could you elaborate on this? It's so beautifully put there, but maybe speak a bit to your time in gardens and gardening and how this has shaped or reshaped your temporal landscape.
Yeah, absolutely. But I guess it's also important to say that I wrote this book and I did this restoration during the stopped clock of the pandemic. So it was already situated in this kind of strange time where time wasn't moving forward, like the numbers were moving forward, but nothing was happening. And I think that really allowed me to pay attention to time in a different way, to think about time in a different way. And the thing that fascinated me was this idea of time as a cycle, this idea that time moves through these moments of glorious fertility, the moment of roses, but then things die away. And realizing, reading my Milton and reading the Garden of Eden and realizing more and more how we have fallen into this very seductive trap of thinking that we should always be inside summer. We should always be inside the summer of capitalism where there are strawberries, but it's Christmas, where there are roses any time of year. Like this idea that we can constantly force the earth to keep us in a kind of summertime, impossible summertime, and the intense ecological cost of that.
Yeah, the grocery store clock is not the same. The grocery
store clock is not ticking. It's a stopped clock. Yeah. And I think the more I thought about that and its intense environmental costs, often hidden from us in the cities that we tend to live in, but elsewhere, enormous costs to this illusion. And that made me think that the garden clock really has something to tell us. And that something is that we have to allow ourselves to move through these cycles of rot and decay and almost nothingness before coming out the other side. It was a real invitation into a different understanding of time.
Well, tell me a little bit about your time in the garden then, too.
That's a different time altogether.
And it's almost like that's beyond time in a way as well. I mean, it's not, and I'm not just talking about COVID time here.
No.
I'm thinking about your youth, your father taking you to these gardens. And even in the Lonely City, there's a garden in New York City that appears. I mean,
the East Village Gardens. So, I mean, gardens are threaded through my life. And like I said earlier, it was a kind of erratic childhood. And gardens really formed this sort of place of security. My parents divorced when I was quite young, and my dad's way of spending time with us was pretty much always to take us to gardens of a stately home. So these really big and beautiful, but often kind of slightly melancholy, slightly past their best, places that felt like they were separate from the world, suspended in time, often with this very compelling kind of sense that you were stepping through a portal in time, that you were somewhere else, that you were in a different time. So I always had this sense that the garden had an odd relationship with time. It had this capacity to take you out of the time that you physically were situated in and move you somewhere else. But I think the other thing, there's a lot of complex ideas about time in the garden. The other thing is that when you're gardening, when you're physically doing something in a garden, you almost inevitably and very rapidly find that you have lost track of the kind of daily preoccupations, and that you're in that state of fluidity or flow that is absolute immersion in the present moment. And I think that is what makes it such a addictive, compelling practice. That's the thing that I most love about it, is that I go out and I start fiddling around with my secateurs, cutting back a fuchsia, and 5 hours have passed. And in that entire time, I've just been swimming through time. It's very different from my normal experiences of, I've got 5 minutes, I need to run.
It's interesting you just said swimming through time, because it makes me think of how swimming in its own way is another one of these methods of actually, when I interviewed the author Jhumpa Lahiri on this show, she talked about that. She talked about how when she's swimming, it's almost a form of losing track of time. Or there's something that sort of takes over the body.
Yeah. Those repetitive tasks where you're just very, I mean, in swimming, you're literally immersed, but that are very immersive. I think they take you into a different kind of time. And I think, honestly, we crave that so badly that that's what makes those activities so desirable, and why you keep coming back to them and coming back to them.
There's something also very therapeutic about both, but gardening in particular, I mean, and I hope this doesn't sound name droppy. I don't want it to sound name droppy, but I maybe it was 2012, I think. I interviewed Rodney King. It was one of the last interviews before he was found dead at the bottom of a swimming pool, actually. And we talked about gardening. Gardening had saved his life.
Oh my God.
And, you know, he, of course, had been an alcoholic, suffered and dealt with just horrible trauma. And gardening was the thing that helped get him out of it. He talked about the power of being in the dirt digging.
I think that's really true. You know, it's a very physical existence, and often we're very divorced from physicality. Increasingly, as we're moving into more and more sort of virtual realms, to actually be touching, caring for things physically, I think is very important to us. And it's constantly exciting because things are constantly changing. So you're sort of invited into this universe of the present moment in which there is continual action. Everything is present moment. There's a bird passing, there's an apple falling off a tree, there's stuff happening around you, and you're a participant in that. And I think back to socialism, it's a sense of us as networked. It's a sense of us as part of an organic community of beings, rather than this sort of dominating individual, which actually is a weary thing to carry around, I think.
Yeah, you go into so many different nodes in The Garden Against Time when it comes to gardening. There's no way we could unpack them all here. But in that book, I did want to bring up one of those nodes, which is, you write that, quote, war is the opposite of a garden, the antithesis of a garden. It's the furthest extremity in terms of human nature and human endeavor. It is possible that a garden will emerge from a bomb site, but it is certain that a bomb will destroy a garden. Which reminds me of, and I had just done this interview recently, not for the show, but for a magazine piece with the Dutch garden designer Piet Oldolf.
Oh, great.
And in it, he said, beauty is what we need in life next to war and all this craziness. It's an escape from reality. Your view of gardens also looks at the costs of this beauty, though, and I wanted to touch on that. Like, could you speak to the costs of the beauty of the garden, or the sort of underlayers of the garden that we don't talk about, because we get so transfixed, I suppose, by the beauty. Yeah,
absolutely. And there's beauty and there's beauty. And I think the kind of gardens that Pete's making are genuinely really beautiful. But what I wanted to really interrogate was the idea of the great gardens of power and what they're concealing in terms of who's excluded, but also in terms of what's funding them. What's the actual financial trail that leads to that sort of production of beauty? Because I think sometimes beauty it's a performance of power. And the way that I did that in the book was to track this family called the Middletons, who started in Britain, who went to the West Indies and then to America, made their fortune in slavery, came back to the UK and really cleansed that fortune by way of the production of an increasingly beautiful and elaborate garden that really physically moved them up the social echelons into the higher sort of rooms of power. They became friends with the royal family. And as I was writing it, I was thinking, the analogy for this is really the Sackler family. The Sackler family used art in order to wash the blood of their enormous wealth. And I think the Middletons worked in a similar way, but instead of art, it's gardens. And that kind of sinister side of beauty is something that I really wanted to be alert to talk about, because that's not something you tend to hear about in garden histories.
Well, those are your two subjects, or two of your big subjects anyway, art and gardening. So that makes sense that you would draw that analogy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. One of the other things that I was hoping to get into was that in part you came to gardening, or botany anyway, through herbalism. This was a very particular time in your life, the herbal medicine time of your life. Could you speak to that? It was your 20s, basically. What led you to herbalism? I mean, it was really activism, right? A sort of a jump from activism to herbalism. Yeah,
I dropped out of university at 20. I was studying English literature, and I got very involved in environmental activism. This is 30 years ago. Very worried about the climate crisis 30 years ago. I've got to say I'm a lot more worried now. So I was particularly involved in campaigns against road building. And that period in the early 1990s in the UK, there were a lot of literally encampments in woods that were on the pathway of proposed roads, where people would come in, they'd set up a camp, they'd build tree houses, live in the trees, literally live in the trees. Like, we'd have houses in the trees, we'd build double lines of ropes between trees so we could move around inside the trees. It was this extraordinary life. It was really an amazing experience of living in a very different way within the 20th century. And like many activists, I burnt out on that after a year or two, and it's a very extreme life. So I left. I ended up living in a field in Sussex, an abandoned pig farm, and I built my own, I'm trying to draw it with my hands, I built my own sort of, they're called benders, and they're like a kind of tent structure that you make by bending hazel poles with a tarpaulin on top. I had a window, I had a double bed and a sofa in there, I had a wood burner, and I wanted to do something that was useful, but also that did no harm. That real sort of strong activist sense of wanting not to contribute to the sort of myriad damages that were being done to the planet. So I decided to train as a herbalist. And actually, a lot of the attraction of that, it was literary. I had read Derek Jarman's Modern Nature as a teenager, and it's full of all this stuff from medieval herbals. So it's full of this kind of spell of language about plants. And I loved it. I found it very seductive. So I trained, which is a 5-year equivalent to a medicine degree. And then I set up practice and I saw patients, and I knew, before I even qualified, I knew that I was on the wrong road. I knew that I wanted to be a writer, but I didn't want to drop out of something else. So I finished it. And really, I think it was an incredible grounding, of course, as a gardener, to learn botany, to learn materia medica, but it was also a training ground to be a journalist, because what you were being taught to do was take case histories. You were being taught really how to interview somebody about the most difficult regions of their life. So I don't regret my 20s. They were pretty strange and they were very wild, but they were foundational, Spencer.
Yeah. Radical.
They were radical. They were out there.
Yeah. No, I mean, it when you read your work, it becomes so clear that time was such a key foundation to everything that came after. I enjoyed learning, too, that prior to writing The Garden Against Time, you'd never read Milton's Paradise Lost. And of course, you, as you were just saying, like had even before you began gardening in earnest, you were learning about plants, you were reading all these books. And there really is this interesting intersection between literature and plants, or literature and gardening, and to that point, writing and gardening.
Yeah.
Could you talk about all that? Like your immersion in, basically from books to plants?
Yeah, because I think that the language of plants extremely exciting and very, very beautiful. And when I was writing The Garden Against Time, I think there was a bit of discussion with my editor about, do we want to have all these lists of plants? What if people don't know what they are? What will they do? And, I'd had that previously with The Lonely City, where it was like, well, all these artworks, should we have pictures of them? And I was like, there's this thing, it's called the internet. People will Google them. So I was really confident that if people wanted to see what Rest Harrow looked like or what a Rosamundi looked like, that they would Google that and they'd see it. But I wanted the language to be there because I think it carries out its own kind of magic operation, that people just love that language. It's very, very old. It's very culturally dense for us. I think our relationship with plants and our sense of wanting to talk about them and think about them goes back a very long way. That felt very important. I've forgotten what the second part of that question was.
Well, I was just asking about...
language generally.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And the connection between writing and plants.
Yeah, and then I think the idea of the garden is so entangled in literature, but also in children's literature, The Secret Garden, Tom's Midnight Garden, and all this sort of sense of gardens being places where things happen, gardens being portals between worlds, that idea that the garden is an imaginative space. What a garden actually is, if we think about it abstractly, is it's situated exactly on the boundary between nature and culture. It's not wild, but it's not completely tame either. It's alive. It's interacting with us. It's pushing back. We might want to dominate it. We might want to allow it to dominate us in a way. So it seems to me that it's situated in a very interesting place. And I think that is why it has such an outsized role in our literature and in our culture. It's there in Mughal miniatures. It's there in all of these different realms of culture, because people find them not just beautiful, but kind of strange, kind of just at the edge of our power.
Hey everyone, taking a quick break here to tell you a little bit about our Season 12 presenting sponsor, the high jewelry maison Van Cleef & Arpels, which this year is collaborating with the American Museum of Natural History in New York to present the exhibition Cosmic Splendor, jewelry from the collections of Van Cleef & Arpels, an awe-inspiring assemblage of dozens of jewelry creations, timepieces, and precious objects with astronomical references. Featuring nearly 70 celestial, mythological, and astrological jewelry creations that celebrate the wonders and mysteries of the cosmos, the exhibition presents an enchanting universe of jewelry from the Maison's patrimonial collection, as well as contemporary creations, some of them on loan from private collections. You can purchase admission tickets or learn more about Cosmic Splendor at amnh.org/exhibitions. That's amnh.org/exhibitions. And now, back to the episode. Tell me about your Paradise Lost time. I mean, this is
this is really a pandemic story.
That is a tomb. I mean, I still have not read Paradise Lost.
You're missing out because it is the greatest. Yeah. I mean, it's the invention of cinema some centuries before cinema was invented. It's a graphic novel. It is so kinetic and funny. It's got fart jokes. None of the things I thought about Paradise Lost are true. It's very different. So, you have this very dramatic story. There's a war in heaven, but you don't start with that. You start with the losers, Satan and his satanic crew, literally falling from heaven, smashing through the air, like crashing down in a sea. And it just carries on like that. It's very physically dramatic. The language is astoundingly rich. And like I say, I was reading it in the pandemic, hadn't seen any people for quite a long time. So I was reading it aloud to myself, and I tend to sort of mutter my way through books. And I'd read a chapter and then I'd leave a while and then I'd kind of come back and get back into it. And on the page, it might look inert, but when you start saying it, you realize it's got this sort of driving rhythm. So it's very exciting. The story is very exciting. Then there'll be like gossipy bits or kind of playful bits or dramatic bits. It's that Milton was really good at telling a story. Shocker.
Well, another text that I wasn't familiar with is the poem The Garden by Andrew Marvell, which you say, I'm not sure there's anything in literature that better enacts the spell of being in a garden than the middle stanza, in which plants are weirdly more active than the speaker, and time itself is, and this is a great word, ensorcelled, slowing line by line until it stops dead, stunned.
Yeah. I can't say anything more than that. Everyone needs to go and read, if not the whole thing. And it's very short, but that middle stanza is spectacular because it really does feel like time gets heavy and syrupy, and you have that sense of lying in the sun under an apple tree on a midsummer day where you just, there are bees and the air's heavy and it's very voluptuous, and you just feel like time has sort of sealed you up inside this gorgeous little honeycomb. I like that.
I don't want to leave the honeycomb. But let's turn to your childhood. And actually, I wanted to start here on the subject of birth. Because you've written beautifully about this subject in your book, Everybody, or maybe it's pronounced Everybody. I don't know.
You can say it either way. It's up to you.
Which was published in 2021. You write, to be born at all is to be situated in a network of relations with other people, and to furthermore find oneself forcibly inserted into linguistic categories that might seem natural and inevitable, but are socially constructed and rigorously policed. We're all stuck in our bodies, meaning stuck inside a grid of conflicting ideas about what those bodies mean, what they're capable of, and what they're allowed or forbidden to do. We're not just individuals, hungry and mortal, but also representative types, subject to expectations, demands, prohibitions, and punishments that vary enormously according to the kind of body we find ourselves inhabiting. Could you speak about your personal experience through this lens?
Yeah, but I mean, how many years ago did I write that? Like, it's become so much more violently the case. It's really, it's kind of sad to hear, because I think that is the fault line that we're on right now, and the rhetoric around it, and not even the rhetoric, the sort of violence of laws around it have become so much more intense in the past, I guess, 5 years since I wrote that bit. My experience, again, was kind of radicalizing. I grew up in a gay family. My mum was gay in the 1980s in the UK, which was a time of intense state-sponsored homophobia. There was a law called Section 28, which meant that schools and local councils couldn't teach about the so-called pretended family relationship of homosexuality. So it was really about the gay family, almost above all else. So to live in a gay family in those times where you are actually explicitly outlawed to grow up inside that kind of closet, and then to come into teenage years during the AIDS crisis and to experience that level of hatred, is to give you a really strong insight into how some types of bodies, how some types of people are treated compared to others, and to have a deep intrinsic skepticism about the state's capacity to put people into categories and to treat people in some of those categories in absolute different ways to others, but to make people feel that these divisions are natural, and that the people who are the natural category that's applauded, that's desired, don't even see until they find themselves crossing over those lines.
Yeah, I mean, you've described yourself as an anxious, not very happy child, and how could you not be in those conditions?
Yeah, I think that's true. And I mean, I'm a trans person, and I think that was something that was probably going on for me through those years as well. But to grow up in that level of homophobia, and, to add to that, growing up in an alcoholic family, which has its own sort of layering of secrecy. So it's like this almost double closet, these sort of two layers of secrecy and concealment. I think that's a very difficult experience personally, but it gives you a sort of X-ray vision into how a society works, and also to have those very formative experiences of protest, to be on Gay Pride in the 80s when, the police weren't marching, the banks weren't marching. It was a very, very different experience, and it was much more radical and much more
now we hear the
brink,
kids.
I think. Yeah, here come the kids. It was, it was an awakening at an early age, in a way that I'm very glad I had.
There's another bit of text from The Gardening Against Time I wanted to bring in here, because you write about how we all travel into adulthood bearing particular burdens, some of which are necessarily personal, individual, idiosyncratic, and some of which are more properly categorized as political, to do with the kind of history doled out to the people who shared our circumstances. I mean, this is almost,
point, really.
It's an extended version of the birth thing.
Yeah.
It's like you're born and then you travel into this, carrying this. And reading Everybody brought me back to a book I spent some time with early in the pandemic, actually just before the pandemic and then COVID, which was Bessel van der Kolk's Body Keeps the Score, which you referenced in that book. Reading your book was almost like, oh, here's like a cultural, political, social theory version of everything Bessel's writing about.
Yeah, I think that's true. And actually, I mean, the central character in Everybody is Wilhelm Reich, who is a controversial and deeply interesting psychoanalyst, activist, anti-fascist, who had this idea of character armor, had this idea that our bodies carry things around that we can't speak verbally. And I think that is at the core of what Bessel is doing. I think that's the core of The Body Keeps the Score. So we were definitely interested in the same set of ideas, but I really wanted to think about the political realm outside of that, and both how people are damaged by the social systems that they find themselves within, but also how people, by way of their bodies, can change that. So it's a history of freedom movements. It's really a history of those, feminism, gay rights, civil rights, these different movements that managed to change the lives of so many for, a few decades? It's so unclear now how long those victories are going to last. And I think one of the big things about writing Everybody was to say, these victories are not permanent and this struggle is not over. The Italians say lotta continua, the struggle continues.
Well, and then gardening is sort of this extended method, mode, way of being beyond that. And you've noted how there's a, quote, fragile aspect to gardening. And this is a big question, but and maybe I'm reaching here.
I'm cracking my knuckles. I'm getting ready.
Well, I wanted to ask, do you see a link between the gardening you're doing, or gardening generally, as a release from your past or one's past, and as a way forward? Like, is gardening in some sense a form of opening up, of letting go, of processing the past, or not moving on from it? But I like the word processing. Is gardening a form of processing? I think
what I came to realize was that, first of all, that gardening and writing were very similar for me, that they're these very complex activities that have an architectural element where you're building something, and then a daily element where you're tending something. And I think both of those things are a way of handling trauma, a way of thinking through trauma, a way of perhaps semi-compulsively needing to make something orderly out of the disorderly. And the drive I feel to do both is similar. It's not that I think all artists are traumatized people, but I think traumatized people often have a desire to make things, to create things, to engage in these processes that have a relationship with complexity and have a relationship with a movement from disorder to order, a movement from chaos and ugliness towards beauty. But then you can't stop there. You can't rest. You need to keep continuing it. And I think that's why the garden is so wonderful, because unlike a book, the garden isn't finished. I didn't finish that garden. Yeah. I finished the book. Yeah. The garden continues to resist my attempts.
Well, one of the other things that I would say is a thread through so much, if not all of your work, but certainly through your writing about art and now gardening, is the role of looking. The study of botany is all about looking. But so is the study of art, and you've spent a lot of time looking. Yeah. Could you speak to that? I know it sounds sort of like an abstract question, just tell me about looking, but how do you think about the time spent looking?
Yeah, so the first two books I wrote, I was really using books and literature as my kind of cultural material. I write these large books that are investigations into culture and politics, but they use art-based material. And the big revelation, the big turning point, I think, in my career was with The Lonely City, realizing that I didn't want to write about books anymore. I wanted to write about art. Somehow it felt to me like traveling into this hall of mirrors, writing books about books, whereas having these physical objects, it just did something. It just allowed me to write and think in a different way. It was incredibly freeing. So from then on, I suppose there has been this strong relationship with looking, but with translating the physical object, David Wojnarowicz magic box or Anna Mendieta photograph, these very charismatic, powerful things that I've written about over the years, finding a way to translate them into language so that the reader can see them without seeing. That's a strange and mysterious process in itself. And that's something I find very compelling to do because it's impossible. What I'm doing is impossible. That act of ekphrasis, that act of turning the visual into the linguistic isn't...
It's a form of magic.
It's a form of magic because it's not... You're never going to be able to pull it off. There's always going to be ways in which you failed to fully summon the thing, because the thing is real.
I would say as an art writer, you have shifted how I think about certain art. Agnes Martin.
That's a good one to talk about.
I'll use as an example, I love Agnes Martin's work. I've seen it many, many times. I had never thought about Agnes Martin's work the way I thought about it until I read your words on Agnes Martin, which probably came from a lot of looking, I imagine.
A lot of looking. And actually, to just think about that act of looking, it's looking and note-making, because I have realised that what I think is looking often isn't looking at all. It's a kind of gazing. And it's not until I've got a pencil in my hand that I go, hey, is that an eyelash stuck to this kind of peach-coloured line below the blue line? There are snags in that pencil mark where her pencil has jumped. These are paintings with stripes where she's drawn lines. And it is the act of writing about looking that makes my looking better. I'm really certain of that I'll kind of scan through a gallery and I've hardly taken anything in. And when I try and resolve it into language, I'm like, my looking was imperfect. I need to go back and I need to write down what I'm seeing as I'm seeing it. So strangely, actually, language makes looking come to life in some strange way for me.
I've seen it called slow looking as well, where you, by reason of trying to understand something much more deeply, you have to do it slowly, because a quick glance, you might get a snapshot, you'll get some information, but it's only by almost painfully
looking. coming back. And I am the kind of person who will walk through a gallery in 5 minutes and just wait and see what catches my eye. I am a quick looker, but I've had to train myself. And I've said this to sort of writing students. You come into a room, you think that you are seeing it and therefore you've absorbed it. But if you don't write down what colour the carpet is in a year's time when you come to write it up, you will have lost all of the texture of that. And those are the textures that the reader needs to enter the world that you're building. It has to be, other senses matter too, but visually in particular, it has to be visually rich.
For all those who haven't read it yet, I highly recommend reading Olivia's book, Funny Weather, which is a collection of their art writing from over, about a decade or so?
I think a decade.
And in the introduction, you write, what I wanted most, apart from a different timeline, was a different kind of time frame. The stopped time of a painting, say, or the drawn out minutes and compressed years of a novel. So you're using these columns of art to kind of make sense of things. And time actually was this incredible element in that.
Time was driving me crazy at that time, because this is also around the moment that I wrote Crudo, and I think
your novel.
My novel, which is, again, this kind of intervention into time, because this is the period, I guess, around 2017, 2016, where time seemed to be speeding up. It was the beginning of that rise of the far right. It was the beginning of the refugee crisis. Brexit was happening here. And I don't know about you, but I was on Twitter a lot then. And it felt like something was happening to time, that it was, this horrific tidal wave that was coming over us all the time, with information that felt absolutely urgent, but that was replaced the next microsecond by information that was absolutely urgent. So you just had this sense of being overwhelmed by a sort of constant horrifying present. And I felt this very powerful need to pull back and to find some way of processing what was happening rather than having reaction after adrenaline-fueled reaction, cortisol spike reaction.
You just articulated why I started a company called The Slowdown. in 2019. I mean, really started thinking about and organizing it in 2018. So it was right
because it was that moment.
It was that moment, and I remember feeling like, what the hell is going on to time right now?
Yeah.
Is everyone else feeling this too? This is insane. I'm feeling insane.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's only got faster and more intense. But I think I made a conscious decision then that I was going to pull back. And the two things I did sort of simultaneously is Funny Weather, which is really those essays that are trying to use art to look and make sense and get different kinds of perspective. And then Crudo, which was this attempt to just catch what that feeling felt like, that sense of overwhelm and that sense of the political and the ultra-personal being smashed together in a way that really felt unprecedented and grotesque and very hard to process and make sense of.
Well, I mean, my whole theory was there's going to be a slowdown. I don't know how it could be. I actually never thought of a pandemic at the time, but that's what ended up happening. There was a pandemic, and then, we're all stuck at home behind our screens looking out at the world out our windows as if it's like, sort of we were in our own little spaceships or something.
Yeah.
It's this very strange moment. And now I think, I don't know, I'm sure a physicist could probably study this somehow maybe, but time to me feels even faster in 2025 than it was in 2018 or 2019.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think this oppressive speed up is beyond our capacities. And that's where art in the larger sense, including literature and film, is so crucial, is to allow us almost these escape hatches into a different kind of time where we can make sense. The process of making sense isn't fast. The process of sort of apprehending is very fast. We can be very fast at grasping the
it's the
significance
Malcolm
of
Gladwell blink thing, It's just like, okay, you get it.
Yeah.
But
absolutely. But no, I haven't got it at all. I haven't begun to get it. And some of these things really take a lot of thought, and they involve things like ambiguity and ambivalence, which can't be registered in an Instagram post or a click. It has to take time and space to hold all of these different positions. And I think that's where something like the novel is so crucial, that it can have this artful relationship with time where you can look at consequences, where you can see how things land over the not just days and weeks, but decades and centuries.
Hey everyone, taking another quick break here to tell you a little bit about our weekly newsletter, where I share a behind-the-scenes look into each time-sensitive episode, and where we also get into various things in the cultural sphere our team at The Slowdown is paying attention to. You can sign up and join our 13,000 plus other subscribers by going to slowdown.media/newsletter. That's slowdown.media/newsletter. And now, back to the episode. I did want to bring up a book that you wrote about, which is in Funny Weather. I wasn't familiar with this text. It's Anthony Powell's A Dance to the Music of Time. And I'm bringing this up because it was a book that Powell started at age 40, which you describe as the age at which you begin to notice how strange time is, how it repeats and returns, how the group you travel with is inexorably diminished. On you go you must, bound feet on the damp ground. The weather isn't looking good. Time's running out. A shrapnel of light falls whitely on the birch. This is where I should say I also just turned 40. So reading this, I was laughing.
I mean, I'd forgotten. I thought that because subsequent to reading Powell, I read Anthony Powell. I read Proust, and, it has similar sets of revelations. And I was like, oh, I'm really thinking these thoughts for the first time. But actually, I think I'd thought them before. And that's the great joke of Proust, is like you're always coming back to things as if for the first time and then realizing that you had exactly the same thought 10 years earlier in exactly the same place, that we repeat and we repeat.
Yeah.
But I suppose the big revelation of the 40s is that all those things you thought were done and dusted come back to you making a completely different sense. And it's almost like you're given back your teens and 20s anew in new forms in a way that you can't possibly guess when you're living inside them, because time keeps producing more and more facets. And I think that's the thing that makes getting older so actually exciting.
Yeah, it's not linear, it's a circle.
It's a circle, yeah. And you're coming back from these sort of strange loops through time where you see something absolutely from the opposite side, like seeing a film twice from different perspectives. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, going back to the same place, swimming in the same lake, or these sorts of experiences. These
and they
sensory,
get more and more layered. They get more and more rich. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about your next book.
Okay.
I want to hear about the next book. In the fall, you're going to be releasing The Silver Book, your second novel.
Yeah.
Tell me about this. I know that you wrote it over the course of 3 sleepless months in Rome.
Yeah, it was a very, very exciting writing experience. Not something I've really experienced in my career, because Crudo is autofiction. Really, everything in Crudo happened. I was just trying to find a way of writing it down. But this book is a novel. It's fictionalized. It has a plot that's fairly complicated. And I had the idea for it in Venice a couple of years earlier, but I couldn't write it because I was so involved in touring the garden against time. So I was holding it like this sort of burning ember for a long time. And as soon as I got to Rome, it was very odd. It was almost like a frequency opened up and I could hear, and I could type as fast as I could type, and I could keep hearing and hearing until it finished. And during that time, it was really about finding the stamina to be able to write for as long as I was writing, which was dawn till the small hours, because it was moving so fast. I think if that had been my first book, I would have a very wrong idea of what writing is like, because it isn't like that. But
yeah. I mean, tell me a little bit about your writing generally, because this feels like a fever dream, right? Like
this is a fever dream.
This is a fever dream, but like
writing is not a fever dream. You will not have these experiences. They do not come along. And writing is often painful, boring. It takes a long time. As a nonfiction writer, I'm an archive-based writer, so I'm spending a lot of time gathering, researching, sifting. It's a slow process of construction. That building site is up for a long time. So to have this experience where something moved so fast, I think it's clear that it's a book by somebody who's written a lot of books, that it wouldn't have been possible new to the game. And it had an element of, I don't want to use the word magic, but there was something strange happening as well. There was something uncanny about the experience. And it's a novel set in 1974 and 5 in Italy. It's about the making of Fellini's Casanova and Pasolini's last film, Salò, and it's about the murder of Pasolini. So it's this very turbulent period, but it's about people who are making something. So it has a lot of the kind of excitements and interests that have drawn me in the past. It's about art making, and it's about fascism and resistance to fascism, which kind of have been the big themes of my work over the last decade.
And cinematic, it sounds like maybe a little Paradise Lost.
Yeah, absolutely. Milton invented cinema. Fellini realized Milton's dream. I mean, I think Paradise Lost is actually Fellini's great theme, isn't it? That's what all his films are about, is like this lost paradise of ecstatic childhood and the difficulties of being a adult in the world. And Casanova is a film about lost dreams, and Salò is a film about the horrors of fascism and the dangers of compliance. I mean, could anything be more relevant right now?
I want to talk Utopia.
Okay.
I feel like in this moment we're in right now, we could all use Utopia now.
Yeah, seriously.
And there's no point to looking at Eden on a map you've written. It's a dream that is carried in the heart, a fertile garden, time and space enough for all of us. You've also written about that Utopia is that you have this sort of imaginative ability to frame utopias and then purposely move toward them.
I mean, not me personally. I think we have that capacity. I think, and I feel like I've been saying this for a long time, I think that we have spent too much time and energy in the past decade or decades imagining dystopias. And I don't think that artists should be doing the imaginative work of the right. I think we need to stop doing that. And I think we need to start thinking about what worlds we want to live in, because without having that idea, and that idea being really tangible, really full of detail, it doesn't happen. You pull in a direction towards something that you imagine. The imagination comes first. And I think in a lot of ways, the right have very powerful imaginations and very powerful skills at conveying those dreams, those fantasies of order, fantasies of discipline, fantasies of control, fantasies of punishment. We also need to be engaged in that work. One of the sort of major characters in The Garden Against Time was William Morris, the utopian socialist, the great artist. And he saw that. He saw that that was a crucial thing. He was present at the very early days of socialism. And he wrote this wonderful book called News from Nowhere that really was, let's call it a seduction. It was written as a seduction. It was written to not lay out a blueprint for a future society, but try and enter imaginatively into what that society could be like on a sensual level, on a sort of friendship level. What would relationships be like under a changed set of political priorities? And I think that's the thing that's really lacking in our world. We're great at imagining what the end game of our current trajectory is. Yeah, we all are aware of the sort of the road-style horrors ahead. But what we're not good at doing right now, interestingly and troublingly, is imagining what the sphere that we would like to move towards would look like, what it would feel like, what it would smell like, how we would engage with each other inside it. And I think that's where I really want to engage imaginatively at the moment.
Yeah, we need this engaging. And something about it to me also has to do about just all of us trying to feel more in our bodies, something you've written a lot about, especially in Everybody. But I would say also in The Garden Against Time, it's a book about feeling. It's about exploring a certain sense of paradise, internal and external. You've written, as long as we're still capable of feeling and expressing vulnerability, intimacy stands a chance. And I kind of think there's this interesting link between intimacy and utopia. And I was wondering if you see that too.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's true. And I think in a way, all of this work started for me with The Lonely City and thinking about loneliness. And in a way, I think loneliness is really at the core of everything that's happening in our world at the moment. The sense of people being alienated and afraid, and that being very easily driven into hatred, into separation, into people hiving off into these very disparate, siloed communities. And especially with young men, but with all kinds of people, I think loneliness is at the root of things, and that the answer to loneliness is clearly not hatred. The answer to loneliness is a kind of intimacy that isn't just about romantic love. It's about a sense of, what I said earlier on, networked thinking, being part of a community that is beyond human, is being at home in a planet and being tender with each other on this mortal world that we live in. We don't have much time.
And I just feel like this makes sense to say. We're sitting in this very intimate studio apartment in the Barbican, right? This sort of utopian setting, having a conversation in person, not behind a screen, in the flesh.
Yeah. And that was one of the strangenesses of the pandemic, is that everyone had this experience of migrating online, really having to live their lives behind screens, and realizing how much there was this communal longing for physical togetherness. You know, I was writing the body about Everybody at that time. It came out in that time, and it felt like there was such a longing for bodily reality. We come out into the world again with those feelings, and what's the next thing that happens? It's like, here's AI. And by the way, there's no discussion about it. Here it is. This is where we're going. Almost as if we've been sort of rushed into the next kind of chamber of screens without having a moment to say, hold on, I have come to my own conclusion, and my conclusion is less of this, not more of this. So I think that's something that is incredibly important, is to have physical conversation, have conversation with people who don't agree with you, enter into your community, be around people. And so much of that is about learning to tolerate the discomfort of other people are real and they're not identical to us. They have different feelings. Those feelings provoke feelings. That sense of messy discomfort is intimacy. That is what we need.
Yeah. And the Rilke thing, like no feeling is final, right?
No feeling is final. Absolutely. Yeah, feelings are weather. Feelings keep changing. And
funny weather.
Funny weather. It's funny weather out there in the human continent.
Well, this I think is a beautiful place to end, which is that you've written this very simply, that the fundamental thing we all share is the fact of a limited lifespan. And I think this is the thing that really brings us all together. We talk about being human, but actually it's about time. It's about, we have a limited amount of time. What are we going to do with it? What are we going to make of it? And it's not just us, it's the next generation and the next generation.
Yeah. And this is the terrible fantasy of life online is, well, you don't have to be trapped by your body. You don't have to be trapped by mortality and temporality. But the fact is we do. The fact is that that's what we share. And it's so interesting that so much of what's happening now is this sort of attack on the physically vulnerable in very different ways. Refugees, trans people, all these different sort of violent attempts to dominate have at their root this sort of terror of physical vulnerability. And I think instead it should be this kind of invitation that that's the place where our solidarity begins, is with our physically vulnerable temporal selves. And
on the opposite side of that spectrum are these sort of figures, many of them actually in Silicon Valley, who are doing the opposite. They're trying to live forever.
They want to live forever with their little head in a vat of, I don't know, what is it? Nitrogen something. That's the fantasy, that you can live off planet, off body, that you can engage in some pure realm of the mind that is all about power and great wealth. These are ancient fantasies. These are really the fantasy of having non-human labor is a really old fantasy. It's the golem. That's what AI is. And I feel like these are sad fantasies. And we know from fairy tales they end in disaster. It's not the best way to live our small time here.
Well, I'm hopeful. I'm maintaining hope. That
Spencer's looking kind of tentative about this.
There still can be,
convinced.
We'll find utopia now somehow.
I think we have to, but I think also it's talking, it's being with people, it's being open to the constantly changing world. That there is always this possibility that things change. None of this is set in stone, and we are actors inside it.
Olivia, thank you.
Thank you.
Extra thanks to our Season 12 presenting sponsor, the high jewelry maison Van Cleef & Arpels. Since its founding in Paris's Place Vendôme in 1906, Van Cleef & Arpels has developed a distinctive blend of poetry and refinement. With its jewelry and watchmaking collections, the maison is an invitation to a timeless universe of beauty and harmony. You can discover more at vancleefarpels.com. That's VANCLEEFARPELS.com. And thank you for listening. You can find more episodes of Time Sensitive on our website, timesensitive.fm, or wherever you listen to podcasts. To keep up with our latest time-sensitive episodes and get behind-the-scenes updates, sign up for our newsletter at slowdown.media/newsletter. That's slowdown.media/newsletter. You can follow us on Instagram at slowdown.media. Our theme music was composed by Billy Martin. This episode was produced by Ramon Broza, Olivia Almer, Mimi Hannon, and Johnny Simon.